Chapter 8. Indirect Action. The afternoon following the homecoming of the Skylark, Seaton and Dorothy returned from a long horseback ride in the park. After Seaton had mounted his motorcycle, Dorothy turned toward a bench in the shade of an old elm to watch a game of tennis on the court next door. Scarcely had she seated herself when a great copper-plated ball alighted upon the lawn in front of her. A heavy steel door snapped open, and a powerful figure clad in aviator's leather, the face completely covered by the hood, leaped out. She jumped to her feet with a cry of joyful surprise, thinking it was Seaton, a cry which died suddenly as she realized that Seaton had just left her, and that this vessel was far too small to be the Skylark. She turned in flight, but the stranger caught her in 3 strides. She found herself helpless in a pair of arms equal in strength to Seaton's own. Picking her up lightly as a baby, DuQuesne carried her over to the space car. Shriek after shriek rang out as she found that her utmost struggles were of no avail against the giant strength of her captor, that her fiercely driven nails glanced harmlessly off the heavy glass and leather of his hood, and that her teeth were equally ineffective against his suit. With the girl in his arms, DuQuesne stepped into the vessel, and as the door clanged shut behind them, Dorothy caught glimpse of another woman, tied hand and foot in one of the side seats of the car. "Tie her feet, Perkins," DuQuesne ordered brusquely, holding her around the body so that her feet extended straight out in front of him. "She's a wildcat." As Perkins threw one end of a small rope around her ankles, Dorothy doubled up her knees, drawing her feet as far away from him as possible. As he incautiously approached, she kicked out viciously with all the force of her muscular young body behind her heavy riding boots. The sharp heel of one of the boots struck Perkins squarely in the pit of his stomach, a true solar plexus blow, and completely knocked out, he staggered back against the instrument board. His outflung arm pushed the speed lever clear out to its last notch, throwing the entire current of the batteries through the bar, which was pointed straight up, as it had been when they made their landing, and closing the switch which threw on the power of the repelling outer coating. There was a creak of the mighty steel fabric, stressed almost to its limits, as the vessel darted upward with its stupendous velocity, and only the carefully planned spring and cushion floor saved their lives as they were thrown flat and held there by the awful force of their acceleration as the space car tore through the thin layer of the Earth's atmosphere. So terrific was their speed that the friction of the air did not have time to set them afire. They were through it and into the perfect vacuum of interstellar space before the thick steel hull was even warmed through. Dorothy lay flat upon her back just as she had fallen, unable even to move her arms, gaining each breath only by a terrible effort. Perkins was a huddled heap under the instrument board. The other captive, Brookings' ex-secretary, was in somewhat better case, as her bonds had snapped like strings, and she was lying at full length in one of the side seats, forced into that position and held there, as the design of the seats was adopted for the most comfortable position possible under such conditions. She, like Dorothy, was gasping for breath, her straining muscles barely able to force air into her lungs because of the paralyzing weight of her chest. DuQuesne alone was able to move, and it required all of his Herculean strength to creep and crawl, snake-like, toward the instrument board. Finally attaining his goal, he summoned all his strength to grasp, not the controlling lever, which he knew was beyond his reach, but a cutout switch only a couple of feet above his head. With a series of convulsive movements, he fought his way up, first until he was crouching on his elbows and knees, and then into a squatting position. Placing his left hand under his right, he made a last supreme effort. Perspiration streamed from him. His mighty muscles stood out in ridges visible even under the heavy leather of his coat. His lips parted in a snarl over his locked teeth as he threw every ounce of his wonderful body into an effort to force his right hand up to the switch. His hand approached it slowly, closed over it, and pulled it out. The result was startling. With the mighty power instantly cut off, and with not even the ordinary force of gravitation to counteract the force DuQuesne was exerting, his own muscular effort hurled him up toward the center of the car and against the instrument board. The switch, still in his grasp, was again closed. His shoulders crashed against the levers which controlled the direction of the bar, swinging it through a wide arc. As the ship darted off in the new direction with its old acceleration, he was hurled against the instrument board, tearing one end loose from its supports and falling unconscious to the floor on the other side. After a time which seemed like an eternity, Dorothy and the other girl felt their senses slowly leave them. With 4 unconscious passengers, the space car hurtled through empty space, its already inconceivable velocity being augmented every second by a quantity bringing its velocity near to that of light, driven onward by the incredible power of the disintegrating copper bar. Seaton had only gone a short distance from his sweetheart's home when, over the purring of his engine, he thought he heard Dorothy's voice raised in a scream. He did not wait to make sure, but whirled his machine about, and the purring changed instantly to a staccato roar as he threw open the throttle and advanced the spark. Gravel flew from beneath his skidding wheels as he negotiated the turn in the Vaneman's grounds at suicidal speed. But with all his haste, he arrived upon the scene just in time to see the door of the space car close. Before he could reach it, the vessel disappeared, with nothing to mark its departure save a violent whirl of grass and sod, uprooted and carried far into the air by the vacuum of its weight. To the excited tennis players and the screaming mother of the abducted girl, it seemed as though the great metal ball had vanished utterly. Only Seaton, knowing what to expect, saw the line it made in the air, and saw for an instant a minute dot in the sky before it disappeared. Interrupting the clamor of the young people, each of whom was trying to tell him what had happened, he spoke to Mrs. Vaneman. "Mother, Dottie's all right," he said rapidly but gently. "Steele's got her, but they won't keep her long. Don't worry, we'll get her back. It may take a week or it may take a year, but we'll bring her back." And, leaping upon his motorcycle, he shattered all the speed laws on his way to Crane's house. "Mart," he yelled, rushing into the shop, "they've got Dottie in a bus made from our plans. Let's go." He started on a run for the testing shed. "Wait a minute," crisply shouted Crane. "Don't go off half-cocked. What is your plan?" "Plan, hell," barked the enraged chemist. "Chase 'em." "Which way did they go and when?" "Straight up, full power, 20 minutes ago." "Too long ago. Straight up has changed its direction several degrees since then. They may have covered 1,000,000 miles, or they may have come back and landed next door. Sit down and think. We need all your brains now." Regaining his self-possession as the wisdom of his friend's advice came home to him, Seaton sat down and pulled out his pipe. There was a tense silence for an instant. Then he leaped to his feet and darted into his room, returning with an object compass whose needle pointed upward. "DuQuesne did it," he cried exultantly. "This baby is still looking right at him. Now let's go. Make it snappy." "Not yet. We should find out how far away they are. That may give us an idea." Suiting action to word, he took up his stopwatch and set the needle swinging. They watched it with strained faces as second after second went by and it still continued to swing. When it had come to rest, Crane read his watch and made a rapid calculation. "About 350 million miles," he stated, "clear out of our solar system already. And from the distance covered, he must have had a constant acceleration so as to approximate the velocity of light. And he is still going with full—" "But nothing can possibly go that fast, Mart. It's impossible. How about Einstein's theory?" "That is a theory. This measurement of distance is a fact, as you know from our tests." "That's right. Another good theory gone to pot. But how do you account for his distance? Do you suppose he's lost control?" "He must have. I do not believe that he would willingly stand that acceleration, nor would he have gone that far of his own accord. Do you?" "I sure don't. We don't know how big a bar they are carrying, so we can't estimate how long it's going to take us to catch them. But let's not waste any more time, Mart. For cat's sakes, let's get busy." "We have only those 4 bars, Dick, 2 for each unit. Do you think that will be enough? Think of how far we may have to go, and what we may possibly get into, and what it will mean to Dottie if we fail for lack of power." Seaton, though furiously eager to be off, paused at this idea, and half regretfully he replied: "We are so far behind them already that I guess a few hours more won't make much difference. It sure would be disastrous to get out near one of the fixed stars and have our power quit. I guess you're right. We'd better get a couple more, make it 4. Then we'll have enough to chase them half our lives. We'd better load up on grub and explosive ammunition too." While Crane and Shiro carried additional provisions and boxes of cartridges into the Skylark, Seaton once more mounted his motorcycle and sped across the city to the brass foundry. The manager of the plant took his order, but blandly informed him that there was not that much copper in the city, that it would be a week or 10 days before the order could be filled. Seaton suggested that they melt up some copper cable and other goods already manufactured, offering 10 times their value, but the manager was obdurate, saying that he could not violate the rule of priority of orders. Seaton then went to other places, endeavoring to buy scrap copper, trolley wire, electric cable, anything made of the ruddy metal, but he found none for sale in quantities large enough to be of any use. After several hours of fruitless search, he returned home in a towering rage and explained to Crane in lurid language his failure to secure the copper. The latter was unmoved. "After you left, it occurred to me that you might not get any. You see, Steele is still watching us." Fire shot from Seaton's eyes. "I'm going to clean up that bunch," he gritted his teeth as he started straight for the door. "Not yet, Dick," Crane remonstrated. "We can go down to Wilson's in a few minutes, and I know we can get it there if he has it. The Skylark is all ready to travel." No more words were needed. They hurried into the space car and soon were standing in the office of the plant in which the vessel had been built. When they had made their wants known, the ironmaster shook his head. "I'm sorry, Crane, but I have only a few pounds of copper in the shop, and we have no suitable furnace." Seaton broke out violently at this, but Crane interrupted him, explaining their inability to get the metal anywhere else and the urgency of their need. When he had finished, Wilson brought his fist down upon his desk. "I'll get it if I have to melt up our dynamos," he roared. "We'll have to rig a crucible, but we'll have your bars out just as soon as the whole force of this damned scrap heap can make 'em." Calling in his foreman, he bellowed orders, and while automobiles scoured the nearby towns for scrap copper, the crucible and molds were made ready. Nearly 2 days passed before the gleaming copper cylinders were finished. During this time, Crane added to their already complete equipment every article he could conceive of their having any use for, while Seaton raged up and down the plant in a black fury of impatience. Just before the bars were ready, they made another reading on the object compass. Their faces grew tense and drawn, and their hearts turned sick as second followed second, and minute followed minute, and the needle still oscillated. Finally, however, it came to rest, and Seaton's voice almost failed him as he read his figures. 235 light years, Mart. They're lost, and still going. Goodbye, old scout, holding out his hand. Tell Vaneman that I'll bring her back or else stay out there myself." "You must be crazy, Dick. You know I'm going." "Why? No use in both of us taking such a chance. If Dottie's gone, of course I want to go too, but you don't." "Nonsense, Dick. Of course this is somewhat farther than we had planned on going for our maiden voyage, but where is the difference? It is just as safe to go 1,000 light years as only one." and we have the power and food for any contingency. There is no more danger in this trip than there is in one to Mars. At all events, I am going, whether you want me to or not, so save your breath." "You lie like a thief, Mart. You know what we are up against as well as I do. But if you insist on coming along, I'm sure glad to have you." As their hands met in a crushing grip, the bars were brought up and loaded into the carriers. Waving goodbye to Wilson, they closed the massive door and took their positions. Seaton adjusted the bar parallel with the needle of the object compass, turned on the coil, and advanced the speed lever until Crane, reading the pyrometers, warned him to slow down, as the shell was heating. Free of the Earth's atmosphere, he slowly advanced the lever, one notch at a time, until he could no longer support the increasing weight of his hand, but had to draw out the rolling support designed for that emergency. He pushed the lever a few notches farther, and felt himself forced down violently into the seat. He was now lying at full length, the seat having automatically moved upward so that his hand still controlled the lever. Still he kept putting on more power, until the indicator showed that more than 3/4 of the power was in operation, and he felt that he could stand but little more. "How are you making it, Mart?" he asked, talking with difficulty because of the great weight of his tongue and jaws. "All right so far," came the response in a hesitating, almost stammering voice, "but I do not know how much more I can take. If you can stand it, go ahead." "This is enough for a while until we get used to it. Any time you want to rest, tell me and I'll cut her down." "Keep her at this for 4 or 5 hours, then cut down until we can walk, so that we can eat and take another reading on distance. Remember that it will take as long to stop as it does to get up speed, and that we must be careful not to ram them. There would be nothing left of either car." "All right. Talking's too darn much work. I'll talk to you again when we ease down. I'm sure glad we're on our way at last." End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Lost in Space. For 48 hours, the uncontrolled atomic motor dragged the masterless vessel with its 4 unconscious passengers through the illimitable reaches of empty space with an awful and constantly increasing velocity. When only a few traces of copper remained in the power plant, the acceleration began to decrease, and the powerful springs began to restore the floor and the seats to their normal positions. The last particle of copper having been transformed into energy, the speed of the vessel became constant. Apparently motionless to those inside it, it was in reality traversing space with a velocity thousands of times greater than that of light. As the force which had been holding them down was relaxed, the lungs, which had been able to secure only enough air to maintain faint sparks of life, began to function more normally, and soon all 4 recovered consciousness, drinking in the life-giving oxygen in a rapid succession of breaths, so deep that it seemed as though their lungs must burst with each inhalation. DuQuesne was the first to gain control of himself. His first effort to rise to his feet lifted him from the floor, and he floated lightly to the ceiling, striking it with a gentle bump, and remaining suspended in the air. The others, who had not yet attempted to move, stared at him in wide-eyed amazement. Reaching out and clutching one of the supporting columns, he drew himself back to the floor and cautiously removed his leather suit, transferring 2 heavy automatic pistols as he did so. By gingerly feeling of his injured body, he discovered that no bones were broken, although he was terribly bruised. He then glanced around to learn how his companions were faring. He saw that they were all sitting up, the girls resting, Perkins removing his aviator's costume. "Good morning, Dr. DuQuesne. What happened when I kicked your friend?" DuQuesne smiled. "Good morning, Miss Vaneman. Several things happened. He fell into the controls, turning on all the juice. We left shortly afterward. I tried to shut the power off, and in doing so, I balled things up worse than ever. Then I went to sleep and just woke up." "Have you any idea where we are?" "No, but I can make a fair estimate, I think." And glancing at the empty chamber in which the bar had been, he took out his notebook and pen and figured for a few minutes. After he finished, he drew himself along by a handrail to one of the windows, then to another. He returned with a puzzled expression on his face and made a long calculation. "I don't exactly know what to make of this," he said thoughtfully. "We are so far away from the earth that even the fixed stars are unrecognizable. The power was on exactly 48 hours, since that is the life of that particular bar under full current. We should still be close to our own solar system, since it is theoretically impossible to develop any velocity greater than that of light. But in fact we have. I know enough about astronomy to recognize the fixed stars from any point within a light year or so of the sun, and I can't see a single familiar star. I never could see how mass could be a function of velocity, and now I am convinced that it is not. We have been accelerating for 48 hours. He turned to Dorothy. "While we were unconscious, Miss Vaneman, we had probably attained a velocity of something like 7,413,000,000 miles per second, and that is the approximate speed at which we are now traveling. We must be nearly 6 quadrillion miles, and that is a space of several hundred light years away from our solar system, or more plainly, about 6 times as far from our earth as the North Star is. We couldn't see our sun with a telescope, even if we knew which way to look for it." At this paralyzing news, Dorothy's face turned white, and Margaret Spencer quietly fainted in her seat. "Then we can never get back?" asked Dorothy slowly. At this question, Perkins's self-control gave way, and his thin veneer of decency disappeared completely. "You got us into this whole thing," he screamed as he leaped at Dorothy with murderous fury gleaming in his pale eyes, and his fingers curved into talons. Instead of reaching her, however, he merely sprawled grotesquely in midair, and Duquesne knocked him clear across the vessel with one powerful blow of his fist. "Get back there, you cowardly cur," he said evenly. "Even though we are a long way from home, try to remember you're a man at least. One more break like that and I'll throw you out of the boat. It isn't her fault that we are out here, but our own. The blame for it is a very small matter anyway. The thing of importance is to get back as soon as possible." "But how can we get back?" asked Perkins sullenly from the corner where he was crouching, fear in every feature. "The power is gone, the controls are wrecked, and we are hopelessly lost in space." "Oh, I wouldn't say hopelessly," returned the other. "I have never been in any situation yet that I couldn't get out of. I won't be convinced until I am dead that I can't get out of this one. We have 2 extra power bars. We can fix the board, and if I can't navigate us back close enough to our solar system to find it, I am more of a dub than I think I am. How about a little bite to eat?" "Show us where it is," exclaimed Dorothy. "Now that you mention it, I find that I am starved to death." Duquesne looked at her keenly. "I admire your nerve, Miss Vaneman. I didn't suppose that that animal over there would show such a wide streak of yellow, but I was rather afraid that you girls might go to pieces." "I'm scared blue, of course," Dorothy admitted frankly, "but hysterics won't do any good, and we simply must get back." "Certainly we must, and we will," stated Duquesne calmly. "If you like, you might find something for us to eat in the galley there, while I see what I can do with this board that I wrecked with my head. By the way, that cubbyhole there is the apartment reserved for you 2 ladies. We are in rather cramped quarters, but I think you will find everything you need." As Dorothy drew herself along the handrail toward the room designated, accompanied by the other girl, who, though conscious, had paid little attention to anything around her, she could not help feeling a thrill of admiration for the splendid villain who had abducted her. Calm and cool, always master of himself, apparently paying no attention to the terrible bruises which disfigured half his face and doubtless half his body as well. She admitted to herself that it was only his example which had enabled her to maintain her self-control in their present plight. As she crawled over Perkins's discarded suit, she remembered that he had not taken any weapons from it. After a rapid glance around to assure herself that she was not being watched, she quickly searched the coat, bringing to light not one but two pistols, which she thrust into her pocket. She saw with relief that they were regulation army automatics, with whose use she was familiar from much target practice with Seaton. In the room, which was a miniature of the one she had seen on the Skylark, the girls found clothing, toilet articles, and everything necessary for a long trip. As they were setting themselves to rights, Dorothy elected to stay in her riding suit. They surveyed each other frankly, and each was reassured by what she saw. Dorothy saw a girl of 22, of her own stature, with a mass of heavy, wavy black hair. Her eyes, a singularly rich and deep brown, contrasted strangely with the beautiful ivory of her skin. She was normally a beautiful girl, thought Dorothy, but her beauty was marred by suffering and privation. Her naturally slender form was thin, her face was haggard and worn. The stranger broke the silence. "I'm Margaret Spencer," she began abruptly, "former secretary to His Royal Highness Brookings of Steel. They swindled my father out of an invention worth millions, and he died broken-hearted. I got the job to see if I couldn't get enough evidence to convict them, and I had quite a lot when they caught me. I had some things that they were afraid to lose, and I had them so well hidden that they couldn't find them, so they kidnapped me to make me give them back. They haven't dared kill me so far, for fear the evidence will show up after my death, which it will. However, I will be legally dead before long, and then they know the whole thing will come out. So they have brought me out here to make me talk or kill me. Talking won't do me any good now, though, and I don't believe it ever would have. They would have killed me after they got the stuff back, anyway. So you see, I at least will never get back to the earth alive." "Cheer up, we'll all get back safely." "No, we won't. You don't know that man Perkins, if that is his name. I never heard him called any real name before. He is simply unspeakable, vile, hideous, everything that is base. He was my jailer, and I utterly loathe and despise him. He is mean and underhanded and tricky. He reminds me of a slimy, poisonous snake. He will kill me, I know it." "But how about Dr. DuQuesne? Surely he isn't that kind of man. He wouldn't let him." "I've never met him before, but from what I heard of him in the office, he's even worse than Perkins, but in an entirely different way. There's nothing small or mean about him, and I don't believe he would go out of his way to hurt anyone as Perkins would. But he is absolutely cold and hard, a perfect fiend. Where his interests are concerned, there's nothing under the sun, good or bad, that he won't do. But I'm glad that Perkins had me instead of the doctor, as they call him. Perkins raises such a bitter personal feeling that anybody would rather die than give up to him in anything. DuQuesne, however, would have tortured me impersonally and scientifically, cold and self-contained all the while, and using the most efficient methods, and I am sure he would have got it out of me some way. He always gets what he goes after." "Oh, come, Miss Spencer," Dorothy interrupted the half-hysterical girl. "You're too hard on him. Didn't you see him knock Perkins down when he came after me?" "Well, maybe he has a few gentlemanly instincts which he uses when he doesn't lose anything by it. More likely he merely intended to rebuke him for a useless action. He is a firm pragmatist. Anything that is useful is all right. Anything that is useless is a crime. More probably yet, he wants you left alive. Of course, that is his real reason. He went to the trouble of kidnapping you, so naturally he won't let Perkins or anyone else kill you until he is through with you. Otherwise, he would have let Perkins do anything he wanted to with you without lifting a finger." "I can't quite believe that," Dorothy replied, though a cold chill struck at her heart as she remembered the inhumane crime attributed to this man, and she quailed at the thought of being in his charge, countless millions of miles from Earth, a thought only partly counteracted by the fact that she was now armed. "He has treated us with every consideration so far. Let's hope for the best. Anyway, I'm sure that we'll get back safely." "Why so sure? Have you something up your sleeve?" "No, or yes, in a way, I have, though nothing very definite. I am Dorothy Vaneman, and I am engaged to the man who discovered the thing that makes this space car go." "That's why they kidnapped you, then, to make him give up all his rights to it. It's like them." "Yes, I think that's why they did it, but they won't keep me long. Dick Seaton will find me. I know, I feel it." "But that's exactly what they want," cried Margaret excitedly. "In my spying around, I heard a little bit about this very thing. The name Seaton brings it to my mind. His car is broken in some way, so that it will kill him the first time he tries to run it." "That's where they underestimated Dick and his partner. You have heard of Martin Crane, of course." "I think I heard his name mentioned in the office, together with Seaton's, but that's all." "Well, besides other things, Martin is quite a wonderful mechanic, and he found out that our Skylark was spoiled. So they built another one, a lot bigger, and I am sure that they are following us right now." "But how can they possibly follow us when we are going so fast and are so far away?" queried the other girl, once more despondent. "I don't quite know, but I do know that Dick will find a way. He's simply wonderful. He knows more now than that Dr. DuQuesne will ever learn in all his life, and he will find us in a few days. I feel it in my bones. Besides, I picked Perkins's pockets of these two pistols. Can you shoot an automatic?" "Yes," replied the other girl as she seized one of the guns, assured herself that its magazine was full, and slipped it into her pocket. "I used to practice a lot with my father. This makes me feel a whole lot better. And call me Peggy, won't you? It will seem good to hear my name again. After what I've been through lately, even this trip will be a vacation for me." "Well, then, cheer up, Peggy dear. We're going to be great friends. Let's go get us something to eat. I'm simply starved, and I know you are too." The presence of the pistol in her pocket and Dorothy's unwavering faith in her lover lifted the stranger out of the mood of despair into which the long imprisonment, the brutal treatment, and the present situation had plunged her, and she was almost cheerful as they drew themselves along the handrail leading to the tiny galley. "I simply can't get used to the idea of nothing having any weight. Look here," laughed Dorothy as she took a boiled ham out of the refrigerator and hung it upon an imaginary hook in the air, where it remained motionless. "Doesn't it make you feel funny?" "It is a queer sensation. I feel light like a toy balloon, and I feel awfully weird inside. If we have no weight, why does it hurt so when we bump into anything? And when you throw anything, like the doctor did Perkins, why does it hit as hard as ever?" "It's mass or inertia or something like that. A thing has it everywhere, whether it weighs anything or not. Dick explained it all to me. I understood it when he told me about it, but I'm afraid it didn't sink in very deep. Did you ever study physics?" "I had a year of it in college, but it was more or less of a joke. I went to a girls' school, and all we had to do in physics was to get the credit. We didn't have to learn it." "Me too. Next time I go to school I'm going to Yale or Harvard or some such place, and I'll learn so much mathematics and science that I'll have to wear a bandeau to keep my massive intellect in place." During this conversation they had prepared a substantial luncheon and had arranged it daintily upon two large trays, in spite of the difficulty caused by the fact that nothing would remain in place by its own weight. the feast prepared, Dorothy took her tray from the table as carefully as she could, and saw the sandwiches and bottles start to float toward the ceiling. Hastily inverting the tray above the escaping viands, she pushed them back down upon the table. In doing so, she lifted herself clear from the floor, as she had forgotten to hold herself down. "What will we do, anyway?" she wailed as she recovered her position. "Everything wants to fly all over the place." "Put another tray on top of it and hold them together," suggested Margaret. "I wish we had a bird cage. Then we could open the door and grab a sandwich as it flies out." By covering the trays, the girls finally carried the luncheon out into the main compartment, where they gave DuQuesne and Perkins one of the trays, and all fell to eating hungrily. DuQuesne paused with a glint of amusement in his one sound eye as he saw Dorothy trying to pour ginger ale out of a bottle. "It can't be done, Miss Vaneman. You'll have to drink it through a straw. That will work, since our air pressure is normal. Be careful not to choke on it, though. Your swallowing will have to be all muscular out here. Gravity won't help you. Oh, wait a bit. I have the control board fixed, and it will be a matter of only a few minutes to put in another bar and get enough acceleration to take the place of gravity." He placed one of the extra power bars in the chamber and pushed the speed lever into the first notch, and there was a lurch of the whole vessel as it swung around the bar so that the floor was once more perpendicular to it. He took a couple of steps, returned, and advanced the lever another notch. "There, that's about the same as gravity. Now we can act like human beings and eat in comfort." "That's a wonderful relief, Doctor," cried Dorothy. "Are we going back toward the earth?" "Not yet. I reversed the bar, but we will have to use up all this one before we can even start back. Until this bar is gone, we will merely be slowing down." As the meal progressed, Dorothy noticed that DuQuesne's left arm seemed almost helpless, and that he ate with great difficulty because of his terribly bruised face. As soon as they had removed the trays, she went into her room, where she had seen a small medicine chest, and brought out a couple of bottles. "Lie down here, Dr. DuQuesne," she commanded. "I'm going to apply a little first aid to the injured. Arnica and iodine are all I can find, but they'll help a little." "I'm all right," began the scientist, but at her imperious gesture he submitted, and she bathed his battered features with the healing lotion and painted the worst bruises with iodine. "I see your arm is lame. Where does it hurt?" "Shoulder's the worst. I rammed it through the board when we started out." He opened his shirt at the throat and bared his shoulder, and Dorothy gasped, as much at the size and power of the muscles displayed as at the extent and severity of the man's injuries. Stepping into the galley, she brought out hot water and towels and gently bathed away the clotted blood that had been forced through the skin. "Massage it a little with the arnica as I move the arm," he directed coolly, and she did so, pityingly. He did not wince and made no sign of pain, but she saw beads of perspiration appear upon his face, and wondered at his fortitude. "That's fine," he said gratefully as she finished, and a peculiar expression came over his face. "It feels 100% better already. But why do you do it? I should think you would feel like crowning me with that basin instead of playing nurse." "Efficiency," she replied with a smile. "I'm taking a leaf out of your own book. You are our chief engineer, you know, and it won't do to have you laid up." "That's a logical explanation, but it doesn't go far enough," he rejoined, still studying her intently. She did not reply, but turned to Perkins. "How are you, Mr. Perkins? Do you require medical attention?" "No," growled Perkins from the seat in which he had crouched immediately after eating. "Keep away from me, or I'll cut your heart out." "Shut up," snapped DuQuesne. "Remember what I said." "I haven't done anything," snarled the other. "I said I would throw you out if you made another break," DuQuesne informed him evenly, "and I meant it. If you can't talk decently, keep still. Understand that you are to keep off Miss Vaneman, words and actions. I am in charge of her, and I will put up with no interference whatever. This is your last warning." "How about Spencer, then?" "I have nothing to say about her. She's not mine," responded DuQuesne with a shrug. An evil light appeared in Perkins's eyes, and he took out a wicked-looking knife and began to strop it carefully upon the leather of the seat, glaring at his victim the while. "Well, I have something to say," blazed Dorothy, but she was silenced by a gesture from Margaret, who calmly took the pistol from her pocket, jerked the slide back, throwing a cartridge into the chamber, and held the weapon up on one finger, admiring it from all sides. "Don't worry about his knife. He has been sharpening it for my benefit for the last month. He doesn't mean anything by it." At this unexpected show of resistance, Perkins stared at her for an instant, then glanced at his coat. "Yes, this was once yours. You needn't bother about picking up your coat. They're both gone. You might be tempted to throw that knife, so drop it on the floor and kick it over to me before I count 3. 1. The heavy pistol steadied into line with his chest, and her finger tightened on the trigger. 2. He obeyed, and she picked up the knife. He turned to DuQuesne, who had watched the scene unmoved, a faint smile upon his saturnine face. "Doctor," he cried, shaking with fear, "why don't you shoot her, or take that gun away from her? Surely you don't want to see me murdered?" "Why not?" replied DuQuesne calmly. "It is nothing to me whether she kills you or you kill her. You brought it on yourself by your own carelessness. Any man with brains doesn't leave guns lying around within reach of prisoners, and a blind man could have seen Miss Vaneman getting your hardware." "You saw her take them and didn't warn me?" croaked Perkins. "Why should I warn you? If you can't take care of your own prisoner, she earns her liberty, as far as I'm concerned. I never did like your style, Perkins, especially your methods of handling, or rather mishandling, women. You could have made her give up the stuff she recovered from that ass Brookings inside of an hour, and wouldn't have had to kill her afterwards either." "How?" sneered the other. "If you are so good at that kind of thing, why didn't you try it on Seaton and Crane?" "There are 7 different methods to use on women like Miss Spencer, each of which will produce the desired result. The reason I did not try them on either Seaton or Crane is that they would have failed. Your method of indirect action is probably the only one that will succeed. That is why I adopted it." "Well, what are you going to do about it?" shrieked Perkins. "Are you going to sit there and lecture all day?" "I am going to do nothing whatever," answered the scientist coldly. "If you had any brains, you would see that you are in no danger. Miss Spencer will undoubtedly kill you if you attack her, not otherwise. This is an Anglo-Saxon weakness." "Did you see me take the pistols?" queried Dorothy. "Certainly. I'm not blind. You have one of them in your right coat pocket now." "Then why didn't you, or don't you, try to take it away from me?" she asked in wonder. "If I had objected to your having them, you would never have gotten them. If I didn't want you to have a gun now, I would take it away from you. You know that, don't you?" And his black eyes stared into her violet ones with such calm certainty of his ability that she felt her heart sink. "Yes," she admitted finally, "I believe you could. That is, unless I were angry enough to shoot you." "That wouldn't help you. I can shoot faster and straighter than you can, and would shoot it out of your hand. However, I have no objection to your having the gun, since it is no part of my plan to offer you any further indignity of any kind. Even if you had the necessary coldness of nerve or cruelty of disposition, of which I have one and Perkins the other, and you neither, you wouldn't shoot me now, because you can't get back to the earth without me. After we get back, I will take the guns away from both of you, if I think it desirable. In the meantime, play with them all you please." "Has Perkins any more knives or guns or things in his room?" demanded Dorothy. "How should I know?" indifferently. Then, as both girls started for Perkins's room, he ordered brusquely, "Sit down, Miss Vaneman. Let them fight it out. Perkins has his orders to lay off you. You lay off him. I'm not taking any chances of you getting hurt. That's one reason I wanted you armed. If he gets gay, shoot him. Otherwise, hands off completely." Dorothy threw up her head in defiance, but meeting his cold stare, she paused irresolutely and finally sat down, biting her lips in anger, while the other girl went on. "That's better. She doesn't need any help to whip that yellow dog. He's whipped already. He never would think of fighting unless the odds were 3-to-1 in his favor." When Margaret had returned from a fruitless search of Perkins's room and had assured herself that he had no more weapons concealed about his person, she thrust the pistol back into her pocket and sat down. "That ends that," she declared. "I guess you will be good now, won't you, Mr. Perkins?" "Yes," the worthy muttered, "I have to be, now that you've got the drop on me and Duquesne's gone back on me. But wait until we get back. I'll get you then, you—" "Stop right there," sharply. "There's nothing I would rather do than shoot you right now if you give me the slightest excuse, such as that name you were about to call me. Now go ahead." Duquesne broke the silence that followed. "Well, now that that battle is over, and since we are fed and rested, I suggest we slow down a bit and get ready to start back. Pick out comfortable seats, everybody, and I'll shoot a little more juice through that bar." Seating himself before the instrument board, he advanced the speed lever slowly until nearly 3/4 of the full power was on, as much as he thought the others could stand. For 60 hours he drove the car, reducing the acceleration only at intervals during which they ate and walked about their narrow quarters in order to restore the blood to circulation in their suffering bodies. The power was not reduced for sleep. Everyone slept as best he could. Dorothy and Margaret talked together at every opportunity, and a real intimacy grew up between them. Perkins was for the most part sullenly quiet, knowing himself despised by all the others and having no outlet here for his particular brand of cleverness. Duquesne was always occupied with his work, and only occasionally addressed a remark to one or another of the party except during meals. At those periods of general recuperation he talked easily and well upon many topics. There was no animosity in his bearing, nor did he seem to perceive any directed toward himself. But when any of the others ventured to infringe upon his ideas of how discipline should be maintained, Duquesne's reproof was merciless. Dorothy almost liked him, but Margaret insisted that she considered him worse than ever. When the bar was exhausted, Duquesne lifted the sole remaining cylinder into place. "We should be nearly stationary with respect to the earth," he remarked. "Now we will start back." "Why, it felt as though we were picking up speed for the last 3 days," exclaimed Margaret. "Yes, it feels that way because we have nothing to judge by. Slowing down in one direction feels exactly like starting up in the opposite one. There is no means of knowing whether we are standing still, going away from the earth, or going toward it, since we have nothing stationary upon which to make observations. However, since the 2 bars were of exactly the same size and were exerted in opposite directions except for a few minutes after we left Earth, we are nearly stationary now. I will put on power until this bar is something less than half gone, then coast for 3 or 4 days. By the end of that time we should be able to recognize our solar system from the appearance of the fixed stars." He again advanced the lever, and for many hours silence filled the car as it hurtled through space. Duquesne, waking up from a long nap, saw that the bar no longer pointed directly toward the top of the ship, perpendicular to the floor, but was inclined at a sharp angle. He reduced the current and felt the lurch of the car as it swung around the bar, increasing the angle many degrees. He measured the angle carefully and peered out of all the windows on one side of the car. Returning to the bar after a time, he again measured the angle and found that it had increased greatly. "What's the matter, Dr. Duquesne?" asked Dorothy, who had also been asleep. "We are being deflected from our course. You see, the bar doesn't point straight up anymore. Of course, the direction of the bar hasn't changed. The car has swung around it." "What does that mean?" "We have come close enough to some star so that its attraction swings the bottom of the car around. Normally, you know, the bottom of the car follows directly behind the bar. It doesn't mean much yet, except that we are being drawn away from our straight line. But if the attraction gets much stronger, it may make us miss our solar system completely. I have been looking for the star in question, but can't see it yet. We'll probably pull away from it very shortly." He threw on the power and for some time watched the bar anxiously, expecting to see it swing back into the vertical, but the angle continually increased. He reduced the current and searched the heavens for the troublesome body. "Do you see it yet?" asked Dorothy with concern. "No, there's apparently nothing near enough to account for all this deflection." He took out a pair of large night glasses and peered through them for several minutes. "Good God, it's a dead sun, and we're nearly onto it. It looks as large as our moon." Springing to the board, he whirled the bar into the vertical. He took down a strange instrument, went to the bottom window, and measured the apparent size of the dark star. Then, after cautioning the rest of the party to sit tight, he advanced the lever farther than it had been before. After half an hour, he again slackened the pace and made another observation, finding to his astonishment that the dark mass had almost doubled its apparent size. Dorothy, noting his expression, was about to speak, but he forestalled her. "We lost ground instead of gaining that spurt," he remarked as he hastened to his post. "It must be inconceivably large to exert such an enormous attractive force at this distance. We'll have to put on full power. Hang on to yourselves as best you can." He then pushed the lever out to its last notch and left it there until the bar was nearly gone, only to find that the faint disk of the monster globe was even larger than before, being now visible to the unaided eye. Revived, the three others saw it plainly, a great dim circle, visible as is the dark portion of the new moon, and, the power shut off, they felt themselves falling toward it with sickening speed. Perkins screamed with mad fear and flung himself groveling upon the floor. Margaret, her nerves still unstrung, clutched at her heart with both hands. Dorothy, though her eyes looked like great black holes in her white face, looked DuQuesne in the eye steadily. "This is the end, then?" "Not yet," he replied in a calm, level voice. "The end will not come for a good many hours, as I have calculated that it will take at least 2 days, probably more, to fall the distance we have to go. We have all that time in which to think out a way of escape." "Won't the outer repulsive shell keep us from striking it, or at least break the force of our fall?" "No, it was designed only as a protection from meteorites and other small bodies. It is heavy enough to swing us away from a small planet, but it will be used up long before we strike." He lighted a cigarette and stared at the case, as though in his own study, his brow wrinkled in thought as he made calculations in his notebook. Finally he rose to his feet. "There is only one chance that I can see. That is to gather up every scrap of copper we have and try to pull ourselves far enough out of line so that we will take a hyperbolic orbit around the body instead of falling into it." "What good will that do us?" asked Margaret, striving for self-control. "We will starve to death finally, won't we?" "Not necessarily. That will give us time to figure out something else." "You won't have to figure out anything else, Doctor," stated Dorothy positively. "If we miss that moon, Dick and Martin will find us before very long." "Not in this life. If they tried to follow us, they're both dead before now." "That's where even you are wrong," she flashed at him. "They knew you were wrecking our machine, so they built another one, a good one. And they know a lot of things about this new metal that you have never dreamed of, since they were not in the plans you stole." DuQuesne went directly to the heart of the matter, paying no attention to her barbed shafts. "Can they follow us through space without seeing us?" he demanded. "Yes, or at least I think they can." "How do they do it?" "I don't know. I wouldn't tell you if I did." "You tell if you know," he declared, his voice cutting like a knife. "But that can wait until after we get out of this. The thing to do now is to dodge that world." He searched the vessel for copper, ruthlessly tearing out almost everything that contained the metal, hammering it flat, and throwing it into the power plant. He set the bar at right angles to the line of their fall and turned on the current. When the metal was exhausted, he made another series of observations upon the body toward which they were falling, and reported quietly: "We made a lot of distance, but not enough. Everything goes in this time." He tore out the single remaining light wire, leaving the car in darkness save for the diffused light of his electric torch, and broke up the only remaining motor. He then took his almost priceless Swiss watch, his heavy signet ring, his scarf pin, and the cartridges from his pistol, and added them to the collection. Flashing his lamp upon Perkins, he relieved him of everything he had which contained copper. "I think I have a few pennies in my pocketbook," suggested Dorothy. "Get 'em," he directed briefly, and while she was gone he searched Margaret without result save for the cartridges in her pistol, as she had no jewelry remaining after her imprisonment. Dorothy returned and handed him everything she had found. "I would like to keep this ring," she said slowly, pointing to a slender circlet of gold set with a solitaire diamond, "if you think there is any chance of us getting clear." "Everything goes that has any copper in it," he said coldly, "and I'm glad to see that Seaton is too good a chemist to buy any platinum jewelry. You may keep the diamond, though," as he wrenched the jewel out of its setting and returned it to her. He threw all the metal into the central chamber, and the vessel gave a tremendous lurch as the power was again applied. It was soon spent, however, and after the final observation, the others waiting in breathless suspense for him to finish his calculations, he made his curt announcement: "Not enough." Perkins, his mind weakened by the strain of the last few days, went completely insane at the words. With a wild howl, he threw himself at the unmoved scientist, who struck him with the butt of his pistol as he leaped, the mighty force of DuQuesne's blow crushing his skull like an eggshell and throwing him backward to the opposite side of the vessel. Margaret lay in her seat in a dead faint. Dorothy and DuQuesne looked at each other in the feeble light of the torch. To the girl's amazement, the man was as calm as though he were safe in his own house, and she made a determined effort to hold herself together. "What next, Dr. DuQuesne?" "I don't know. We have a couple days yet, at least. I'll have to study a while." "In that time Dick will find us, I know." "Even if they do find us in time, which I doubt, what good will it do? It simply means they will go with us instead of saving us, for of course they can't pull away, since we couldn't. I hope they don't find us, but locate this star in time to keep away from it." "Why?" she gasped. "You have been planning to kill both of them. I should think you would be delighted to take them with us." "Far from it. Please try to be logical. I intended to remove them because they stood in the way of my developing this new metal. If I am to be out of the way, and frankly I see very little chance of getting out of this, I hope that Seaton goes ahead with it. It is the greatest discovery the world has ever known, and if both Seaton and I, the only two men in the world who know how to handle it, drop out, it will be lost for perhaps hundreds of years." "If Dick's finding us means that he must go too, of course I hope that he won't find us, but I don't believe that. I simply know that he could get us away from here." She continued more slowly, almost speaking to herself, her heart sinking with her voice. "He is following us, and he won't stop even if he does see this dead star and knows that he can't get away. We will die together." "There's no denying The fact that our situation is critical. But you know a man isn't dead until after his heart stops beating. We have 2 whole days yet, and in that time I can probably dope out some way of getting away from here." "I hope so," she replied, keeping her voice from breaking only by a great effort. "But go ahead with your doping. I'm worn out." She drew herself down upon one of the seats and stared at the ceiling, fighting to restrain an almost overpowering impulse to scream. Thus the hours wore by. Perkins dead, Margaret still unconscious, Dorothy lying in her seat, her thoughts a formless prayer, buoyed up only by her faith in God and in her lover. Duquesne, self-possessed, smoking innumerable cigarettes, his keen mind grappling with its most desperate problem, grimly fighting until the very last instant of life, while the powerless space car fell with an appalling velocity, faster and faster, falling toward that cold and desolate monster of the heaven. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Rescue. Seaton and Crane drove the Skylark in the direction indicated by the unwavering object compass, with the greatest acceleration they could stand, each man taking a 12-hour watch at the instrument board. Now indeed did the Skylark justify the faith of her builders, and the 2 inventors, with an exultant certainty of their success, flew out beyond man's wildest imaginings. Had it not been for the haunting fear of Dorothy's safety, the journey would have been one of pure triumph, and even that anxiety did not prevent a profound joy in the enterprise. "If that misguided mutt thinks he could pull off a stunt like that and get away with it, he's got another think coming," asserted Seaton, after making a reading on the other car after several days of flight. "He went off half cocked this time for sure, and we've got him foul. We'd better put on some negative pretty soon, hadn't we, Mart? Only a little over 100 light years now." Crane nodded agreement, and Seaton continued: "It'll take as long to stop, of course, as it has taken to get out here, and if we ram them, good night. Let's figure it out as nearly as we can." They calculated their own speed and that of the other vessel, as shown by the various readings taken, and applied just enough negative acceleration to slow the Skylark down to the speed of the other space car when they should come up with it. They smiled at each other in recognition of the perfect working of the mechanism when the huge vessel had spun with a sickening lurch through a complete half circle the instant the power was reversed. Each knew that they were actually traveling in a direction that to them seemed down, but with a constantly diminishing velocity, even though they seemed to be still going up with an increasing speed. Until nearly the end of the calculated time, the 2 took turns as before, but as the time of the meeting drew near, both men were on the alert, taking readings on the object compass every few minutes. Finally Crane announced: "We're almost on them, Dick. They are so close that it is almost impossible to time the needle. Less than 10,000 miles." Seaton gradually increased the retarding force until the needle showed that they were very close to the other vessel and maintaining a constant distance from it. He then shut off the power, and both men hurried to the bottom window to search for the fleeing ship with their powerful night glasses. They looked at each other in amazement as they felt themselves falling almost directly downward with an astounding acceleration. "What do you make of it, Dick?" asked Crane calmly, as he brought his glasses to his eyes and stared out into the black heavens, studded with multitudes of brilliant and unfamiliar stars. "I don't make it at all, Mart. By the feel, I should say we were falling toward something that would make our Earth look like a pinhead. I remember now that I noticed that the bus was getting a little out of plumb with the bar all this last watch. I didn't pay much attention to it, as I couldn't see anything out of the way. Nothing but a sun could be big enough to raise all this disturbance, and I can't see any close enough to be afraid of. Can you?" "No, and I cannot see the steel space car either. Look sharp." Of course, Seaton continued to argue as he peered out into the night. It is theoretically possible that a heavenly body can exist large enough so that it could exert even this much force and still appear no larger than an ordinary star, but I don't believe it is probable. Give me 3 or 4 minutes of visual angle and I'll believe anything, but none of these stars are big enough to have any visual angle at all. Furthermore, "There is at least half a degree of visual angle," broke in his friend intensely, "just to the left of that constellation that looks so much like a question mark. It's not bright, but dark, like a very dark moon, barely perceptible." Seaton pointed his glass eagerly in the direction indicated. "Great cat!" he ejaculated. "I'll say that's some moon. Wouldn't that rattle your slats? And there's Duquesne's bust, too, on the right edge. Get it?" As they stood up, Seaton's mood turned to one of deadly earnestness, and a grave look came over Crane's face as the seriousness of their situation dawned upon them. Trained mathematicians both, they knew instantly that the unknown world was of inconceivable mass, and that their chance of escape was none too good, even should they abandon the other craft to its fate. Seaton stared at Crane, his fists clenched and drops of perspiration standing on his forehead. Suddenly, with agony in his eyes and in his voice, he spoke. "Mighty slim chance of getting away if we go through with it, old man. Hate like the devil. Have no right to ask you to throw yourself away, too." "Enough of that, Dick. You had nothing to do with my coming. You could not have kept me away. We will see it through." Their hands met in a fierce clasp, broken by Seaton as he jumped to the levers with an intense, "Well, let's get busy." In a few minutes they had reduced the distance until they could plainly see the other vessel, a small black circle against the faintly luminous disk. As it leaped into clear relief in the beam of his powerful searchlight, Seaton focused the great attractor upon the fugitive car and threw in the lever which released the full force of that mighty magnet, while Crane attracted the attention of the vessel's occupants by means of a momentary burst of solid machine gun bullets, which he knew would glance harmlessly off the steel hull. After an interminable silence, Duquesne drew himself out of his seat. He took a long inhalation, deposited the butt of his cigarette carefully in his ashtray, and made his way to his room. He returned with 3 heavy fur suits provided with air helmets, 2 of which he handed to the girls, who were huddled in a seat with their arms around each other. These suits were the armor designed by Crane for use in exploring the vacuum and the intense cold of dead worlds. Airtight, braced with fine steel netting, and supplied with air at normal pressure from small tanks by automatic valves, they made their wearers independent of surrounding conditions of pressure and temperature. "The next thing to do," Duquesne stated calmly, "is to get the copper off the outside of the ship. That is the last resort, as it robs us of our only safeguard against meteorites, but this is the time for last resort measures. I'm going after that copper. Put these suits on, as our air will leave as soon as I open the door, and practically an absolute vacuum and equally absolute zero will come in." As he spoke, the ship was enveloped in a blinding glare, and they were thrown flat as the vessel slowed down in its terrific fall. The thought flashed across Duquesne's mind that they had already entered the atmosphere of the monster globe and were being slowed down and set afire by its friction, but he dismissed it as quickly as it had come. The light in that case would be the green of copper, not this bluish white. His next thought was that there had been a collision of meteors in the neighborhood, and that their retardation was due to the outer coating. While these thoughts were flickering through his mind, they heard an insistent metallic tapping, which Duquesne recognized instantly. "A machine gun," he blurted in amazement. "How in—" "It's Dick!" screamed Dorothy with flashing eyes. "He's found us, just as I knew he would. You couldn't beat Dick and Martin in 1,000 years." The tension under which they had been laboring so long suddenly released. The two girls locked their arms around each other in a half hysterical outburst of relief. Margaret's meaningless words and Dorothy's incoherent praise of her lover and Crane mingled with their racking sobs as each fought to recover self-possession. Duquesne had instantly mounted to the upper window. Throwing back the cover, he flashed his torch rapidly. The glare of the searchlight was snuffed out, and he saw a flashlight spell out in dots and dashes. "Can you read Morse?" "Yes," he signaled back. "Power gone, drifting into." "We know it. Will you resist?" "No." "Have you fur pressure suits?" "Yes." "Put them on. Shut off your outer coating. We'll touch so your upper door against our lower. Open. Transfer. Quick." "Okay." Hastily returning to the main compartment, he briefly informed the girls as to what had happened. All three donned the suits and stationed themselves at the upper opening. Rapidly, but with unerring precision, the two ships were brought into place and held together by the attractor. As the doors were opened, there was a screaming hiss as the air of the vessels escaped through the narrow crack between them. The passengers saw the moisture in the air turn into snow, and saw the air itself first liquefy and then freeze into a solid coating upon the metal around the orifice at the touch of the frightful cold outside. The absolute zero of interstellar space, about 460 degrees below zero in the everyday scale of temperature. The moisture of their breath condensed upon the inside of the double glasses of their helmets, rendering sight useless. Dorothy pushed the other girl ahead of her. Duquesne seized her and tossed her lightly through the doorway in such a manner that she would not touch the metal, which would have frozen instantly anything coming into contact with it. Seaton was waiting. Feeling a woman's slender form in his arms, he crushed her to him in a mighty embrace, and was astonished to feel a movement of resistance and to hear a strange, girlish voice cry out, "Don't! It's me. Dorothy's next." Releasing her abruptly, he passed her on to Martin and turned just in time to catch his sweetheart, who, knowing that he would be there and recognizing his powerful arms at the first touch, returned his embrace with a fierce intensity which even he had never suspected that she could exert. They stood motionless, locked in each other's arms, while Duquesne dove through the opening and snapped the door shut behind him. The air pressure and temperature back to normal, the cumbersome suits were hastily removed, and Seaton's lips met Dorothy's in a long, clinging caress. Duquesne's cold, incisive voice broke the silence. "Every second counts. I would suggest that we go somewhere." "Just a minute," snapped Crane. "Dick, what shall we do with this murderer?" Seaton had forgotten Duquesne utterly in the joy of holding his sweetheart in his arms, but at his friend's words he faced about and his face grew stern. "By rights, we ought to chuck him back into his own tub and let him go to the devil," he said savagely, doubling his fists and turning swiftly. "No, no, Dick," remonstrated Dorothy, seizing his arm. "He treated us very well and saved my life once. Anyway, you mustn't kill him." "No, I suppose not," grudgingly assented her lover, "and I won't either, unless he gives me at least half an excuse." "We might iron him to a post," suggested Crane doubtfully. "I think there's a better way," replied Seaton. "He may be able to work his way. His brain hits on all 12 and he's strong as a bull. Our chance of getting back isn't a certainty, as you know." He turned to Duquesne. "I've heard that your word is good." "It has never been broken." "Will you give your word to act as one of the party for the good of us all if we don't iron you?" "Yes, until we get back to Earth, provided, of course, that I reserve the right to escape at any time between now and then, if I wish to, and can do so without injuring the vessel or any member of the party in any way." "Agreed. Let's get busy. We're altogether too close to that dud there to suit me. Sit tight, everybody. We're on our way," he cried as he turned to the board, applied one notch of power, and shut off the attractor. The Skylark slowed down a trifle in its mad fall. The other vessel continued on its way, a helpless hulk manned by a corpse falling to destruction upon the bleak wastes of a desert world. "Hold on," said DuQuesne sharply. "Your power is the same as mine was, in proportion to your mass, isn't it?" "Yes." "Then our goose is cooked. I couldn't pull away from it with everything I had. Couldn't even swing out enough to make an orbit, either hyperbolic or elliptical, around it. With the reserve bar, you will be able to make an orbit, but you can't get away from it." "Thanks for the dope. That saves our wasting some effort. Our power plant can be doubled up in emergencies, thanks to Martin's cautious old bean. We'll simply double her up and go away from here." "There is one thing we didn't consider quite enough," said Crane, thoughtfully. "I started to faint back there before the full power of even one motor was in use. With the motor doubled, each of us will be held down by a force of many tons. We would all be helpless." "Yes," added Dorothy, with foreboding in her eyes. "We were all unconscious on the way out, except for Dr. DuQuesne. Well, then, Blackie and I, as the huskiest members of the party, will give her the juice until only one of us is left with his eyes open. If that isn't enough to pull us clear, we'll have to give her the whole works and let her ramble by herself after we all go out. How about it, Blackie?" Unconsciously falling into the old bureau nickname. "Do you think we can make it stop at unconsciousness with double power on?" DuQuesne studied the two girls carefully. "With oxygen in the helmets instead of air, we all may be able to stand it. These special cushions keep the body from flattening out, as it normally would under such a pressure. The unconsciousness is simply a suffocation caused by the lateral muscles being unable to lift the ribs. In other words, the air pumps aren't strong enough for the added work put upon them. At least we stand a chance this way. We may live through the pressure while we are pulling away, and we certainly shall die if we don't pull away." After a brief consultation, the men set to work with furious haste. While Crane placed extra bars in each of the motors, and DuQuesne made careful observations upon the apparent size of the now plainly visible world toward which they were being drawn so irresistibly, Seaton connected the helmets with the air and oxygen tank through a valve upon the board, by means of which he could change at will the oxygen content of the air they breathed. He then placed the strange girl, who seemed dazed by the frightful sensation of their never-ending fall, upon one of the seats, fitted the cumbersome helmet upon her head, strapped her carefully into place, and turned to Dorothy. In an instant they were in each other's arms. He felt her labored breathing and the wild beating of her heart, pressed so closely to his, and he saw the fear of the unknown in the violet depths of her eyes, but she looked at him unflinchingly. "Dick, sweetheart, if this is goodbye—" He interrupted her with a kiss. "It isn't goodbye yet, Dottie mine. This is merely a trial effort to see what we will have to do to get away. Next time will be the time to worry." "I'm not worried, really, but in case, you see, we—" The gray eyes softened and misted over as he pressed his cheek to hers. "I understand, sweetheart," he whispered. "This is not goodbye, but if we don't pull through we'll go together, and that is what we both want." As Crane and DuQuesne finished their tasks, Seaton fitted his sweetheart's helmet, placed her tenderly upon the seat, buckled the heavy restraining straps about her slender body, and donned his own helmet. He took his place at the main instrument board, DuQuesne stationing himself at the other. "What did you read on it, Blackie?" asked Seaton. 2 degrees 1 minute 12 seconds diameter," replied DuQuesne, "altogether too close for comfort. How shall we apply the power? One of us must stay awake, or we'll go on as long as the bars last." "You put on one notch, then I'll put on one. We can feel the bus jump with each notch. We'll keep it up until one of us is so far gone that he can't raise the bar. The one that raises last will have to let the ship run for 30 minutes or an hour, then cut down his power. Then the other fellow will revive and cut his off for an observation. How's that?" "All right." They took their places, and Seaton felt the vessel slow down in its horrible fall as DuQuesne threw his lever into the first notch. He responded instantly by advancing his own, and notch after notch the power applied to the ship by the now doubled motor was rapidly increased. The passengers felt their suits envelop them and began to labor for breath. Seaton slowly turned the mixing valve a little with each advance of his lever until pure oxygen flowed through the pipes. The power levers had moved scarcely half of their range, yet minutes now intervened between each advance instead of seconds, as at the start. As each of the two men was determined that he would make the last advance, the duel continued longer than either would have thought possible. Seaton made what he thought his final effort and waited, only to feel, after a few minutes, the upward surge telling him that DuQuesne was still able to move his lever. His brain reeled. His arm seemed paralyzed by its own enormous weight, and it felt as though it, the rolling table upon which it rested, and the supporting framework were so immovably welded together that it was impossible to move it even the quarter-inch necessary to operate the ratchet lever. He could not move his body, which was oppressed by a sickening weight. His utmost efforts to breathe forced only a little of the life-giving oxygen into his lungs, which smarted painfully at the touch of the undiluted gas, and he felt that he could not long retain consciousness under such conditions. Nevertheless, he summoned all his strength and advanced the lever one more notch. He stared at the clock face above his head, knowing that if DuQuesne could advance his lever again, he would lose consciousness and be beaten. Minute after minute went by, however, and the acceleration of the ship remained constant. Seaton, knowing that he was in sole control of the power plant, fought to retain possession of his faculties, while the hands of the clock told off the interminable minutes. After an eternity of time, an hour had passed, and Seaton attempted to cut down his power, only to find with horror that the long strain had so weakened him that he could not reverse the ratchet. He was still able, however, to give the lever the backward jerk which disconnected the wires completely, and the safety straps creaked with the sudden stress as, half the power instantly shut off, the suddenly released springs tried to hurl 5 bodies against the ceiling. After a few minutes, DuQuesne revived and slowly cut off his power. To the dismay of both men, they were again falling. DuQuesne hurried to the lower window to make the observation, remarking, "You're a better man than I, Gunga Din." "Only because you're so badly bunged up. One more notch would have got my goat," replied Seaton frankly as he made his way to Dorothy's side. He noticed as he reached her that Crane had removed his helmet and was approaching the other girl. By the time DuQuesne had finished the observation, the other passengers had completely recovered, apparently none the worse for their experience. "Did we gain anything?" asked Seaton eagerly. "I make it 2-4-13. We lost about 2 minutes of arc. How much power did we have on?" "A little over half. 32 points out of 60 possible." "We're still falling pretty fast. We'll have to put on everything we've got. Since neither of us can put it on, we'll have to rig up an automatic feed. It'll take time, but it's the only way." "The automatic control is already there," put in Crane, forestalling Seaton's explanation. "The only question is whether we will live through it, and that is not really a question, since certain death is the only alternative. We must do it." "We sure must," answered Seaton soberly. Dorothy gravely nodded assent. "What do you fellows think of a little plus pressure on the oxygen?" asked Seaton. "I think it would help a lot." "I think it's a good idea," said DuQuesne, and Crane added, 4 or 5 inches of water will be about all the pressure we can stand. Any more might burn our lungs too badly." The pressure apparatus was quickly arranged, and the motors filled to capacity with reserve bars, enough to last 72 hours. The scientists having decided that they must risk everything on one trial, and put in enough, if possible, to pull them clear out of the influence of this center of attraction, as the time lost in slowing up to change bars might well mean the difference between success and failure. Where they might lie at the end of the wild dash for safety, how they were to retrace their way with their depleted supply of copper, what other dangers of dead star, planet, or sun lay in their path, all these were terrifying questions that had to be ignored. DuQuesne was the only member of the party who actually felt any calmness, the quiet of the others expressing their courage in facing fear. Life seemed very sweet and desirable to them, the distant earth a very paradise. Through Dorothy's mind flashed the visions she had built up during long, sweet hours, visions of a long life with Seaton. As she breathed an inaudible prayer, she glanced up and saw Seaton standing beside her, gazing down upon her with his very soul in his eyes. Never would she forget the expression upon his face. Even in that crucial hour, his great love for her overshadowed every other feeling, and no thought of self was in his mind. His care was all for her. There was a long farewell caress. Both knew that it might be goodbye, but both were silent as the violet eyes and the gray looked into each other's depths and conveyed messages far beyond the power of words. Once more he adjusted her helmet and strapped her into place. As Crane had in the meantime cared for the other girl, the men again took their places, and Seaton started the motor, which would automatically advance the speed levers 1 notch every 5 seconds, until the full power of both motors was exerted. As the power was increased, he turned the valve as before, until the helmets were filled with pure oxygen under a pressure of 5 inches of water. Margaret Spencer, weakened by her imprisonment, was the first to lose consciousness, and soon afterwards Dorothy felt her senses leave her. A half a minute, in the course of which 6 mighty surges were felt, as more of the power of the doubled motor was released, and Crane had gone, calmly analyzing his sensations to the last. After a time, DuQuesne also lapsed into unconsciousness, making no particular effort to avoid it, as he knew that the involuntary muscles would function quite as well without the direction of the will. Seaton, although he knew it was useless, fought to keep his senses as long as possible, counting the impulses he felt as the levers were advanced. 32. He felt exactly as he had before, when he had advanced the lever for the last time. 33. A giant hand shut off his breath completely, though he was fighting to his utmost for air. An intolerable weight rested upon his eyeballs, forcing them backward into his head. The universe whirled about him in dizzy circles. Orange and black and green stars flashed before his bursting eyes. 34. The stars became more brilliant and of a more variegated color, and a giant pen dipped in fire was writing equations and mathematical chemical symbols upon his quivering brain. He joined the circling universe, which he had hitherto kept away from him by main strength, and whirled about his own body, tracing a logarithmic spiral with infinite velocity, leaving his body an infinite distance behind. 35. And the stars and the fiery pen exploded into a wild coruscation of searing, blinding light, and he plunged from his spiral into a black abyss. In spite of the terrific stress put upon the machine, every part functioned perfectly, and soon after Seaton had lost consciousness, the vessel began to draw away from the sinister globe. Slowly at first, faster and faster as more and more of the almost unlimited power of the mighty motor was released. Soon the levers were out to the last notch, and the machine was exerting its maximum effort. 1 hour, and an observer upon the Skylark would have seen that the apparent size of the massive unknown world was rapidly decreasing. 20 hours, and it was so far away as to be invisible, though its effect was still great. 40 hours, and the effect was slight. 60 hours, and the Skylark was out of the range of the slightest measurable force of the monster it had left. Hurtled onward by the inconceivable power of the unleashed copper demon in its center, the Skylark flew through the infinite reaches of interstellar space with an unthinkable, almost incalculable velocity, beside which the velocity of light was of that of a snail to that of a rifle bullet, a velocity augmented every second by a quantity almost double that of light itself. End of chapter 10.